Yeah, so I hate to say it, I'm long overdue for a video. It's a weird habit of mine where it's like, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and knock out one more thing, and then I'll shoot a video, and then once that thing is done, all of a sudden it's, you know, late at night, it's winter, so, you know, the sun sets early, and it's too dark for me to show you guys what's under the car. But today, I'm committed to go ahead and show you where we're at with this build, and everything I've done so far to, you know, get it to this point. So here we are. Here's what the LS looks like today. Most of it, like I said, all the plumbing is done. I just got to throw all my wiring on top and, you know, ready to jam. So let's start. Dude, there's so much stuff here. First, motor mounts. We went ahead and used excessive motor mounts. These are white line bushings. I got them for a deal. They actually fit a Cressida and they fit an LS, which is weird. But yeah, I reused my stock mounts with the LS brackets from Excessive. The headers you see here are CX Racing LS or Cressida LS swap headers. They fit pretty good. You do have to feed the steering shaft through the headers once you install them, so it's a matter of taking those apart, but I can stick my hand underneath here and get to those bolts, so that's nice. It also opens up this whole area for all my brake system stuff, which is kind of nice. I have clearance here. It is a little bit spicy way down there where the power steering line goes in. I will wrap the headers eventually, but I'm going to go ahead and get this thing started up first. You know, if it's puking fluids, I won't get the header wrap all soaked. I was able to get the header to fit from the top down by taking off the valve covers. It's like right in here somewhere, it's touching. So once the valve cover comes off, I can drop the header down from the top. On this side, after I put everything in, the header is hard to get in from the top, so it's preferable that this one comes in from the bottom. But it's doable from the top. I just probably have to move some of those new lines out of the way. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look under the car and show you the trans mount and the whole trans setup. From here underneath you can kind of see where the headers come out and the trans mount. This is another Excessive piece. I didn't have to drill any holes. It all lined up and bolted right up. Everything bolted in. I did have to hammer a couple areas. In the last video you saw how I cut off parts of the transmission to get it to clear better, and that did help. Way down there, you can't really see it, but there's a Canton oil pan. It's Canton's LS Drift and Road Race pan. So the pan has, as you can see, probably a 1/4 inch to an 1/8 of clearance right here. So that's as far as I wanted to push the oil pan back. My goal was to push it back as far as I could. And between this little gap right here, which I could probably make more clearance, and the shifter hole, I went back as far as I could. So yeah, maybe a 1/4 inch lower than the subframe, but definitely a lot higher than the QuickTime bell housing thing that you know, that covers the flywheel and all that good stuff. Alright, so let's talk about the clutch and throttle. So the throttle cable comes out of a Toyota Avalon. Now, what I found out was most of the throttle cables are exactly the same from Toyota. They all bolt up the same right here at the firewall. They're just different lengths. So I went to the junkyard and pulled as many throttle cables as I could that were longer, compared them all, and it ended up being the Toyota Avalon cable, which was the one I went with. So this is a 3/4 inch Master. The reservoir comes off my old Clutch Master, which came out of, I believe, early 90s Celica. It's part of the Excessive kit. So they sell you a full-on pedal and master, and if you need to go to a bigger master, you install the Tundra, I forget what year Tundra, but it's a Tundra Master that's 3/4 inch, and then you can run the reservoir from your Celica Master on top of it, and everything is Gucci. What I ran down there is just a banjo to the hardline, -4 line, and then I also have this other line right here which also goes to the clutch slave cylinder, so I can bleed my brakes, or bleed my clutch. So I stick this piece down in here and I just pump the pedal, and it pretty much lets all the air out of the system. We got the clutch bed and everything is good. It feels great. It's got a nice spring to it. And my throttle pedal, obviously it goes full throttle, but the pedal bottoms out before I get to full throttle, so gotta figure out what to do about that. Internet says to bend the lever on the gas pedal so that way you get a little bit more pull out of the throttle cable. Other cool thing was I went ahead and finished my bezel. So if you looked at my Instagram, you saw that I was making this bezel out of fiberglass, and it is, you know, underneath fiberglass. I 3D printed a box to hold the Holley digital dash. That's actually glued to the fiberglass, and then once I was done with all that, I overlaid carbon fiber. I mean, like legit, you know, fabric carbon fiber. Now, I do have to do some touch-ups. Some of the resin didn't lay flat, so I gotta sand it, smooth it, polish it, and maybe throw a layer of clear matte over it so it doesn't blind me for it being shiny. But yeah, it's a carbon fiber, it's a plate that I made to fit the Holley dash, and that's how it looks. And then I also have the Holley EFI Terminator controller thingy that connects to the ECU. And this right here, I just 3D printed the clock pod. So actually, Tatiana designed the clock pod, and we actually prototyped it first with the gauge. I took her design, filled the hole, and then built a standoff to mount 2 screws to it so I can mount my Terminator screen. It is a little bit tilted down, so I probably will do another revision where it's a little bit more flat, but the goal was so that way I could slide this out and not hit. I got about a finger gap here. I'm gonna see if I can get it just a little bit closer so the screen itself is more upright and facing down. And that's the interior for now. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff under here I gotta figure out. I do want to use a factory fuse box and the junction boxes that connect to the factory fuse box to power up the rest of the car. So I gotta figure out how to turn it on, don't burn the whole car down, and get it to power so I can still use my key for ignition and to start the car and all that good stuff, along with all the, you know, like heater controls, door controls, and even like the sunroof. I like to get all that stuff to work again. Let's knock this out. This is the shifter. This boot comes out of my old car, but is a boot that comes from an SC300, SC400, or a Supra. It's flipped 180 degrees because the shifter is moved back. But as you can tell, the shifter is pretty square inside the hole. I mean, I guess it was more forward before, but now it's centered. This is a sticky shifter, which lets me use Japanese knobs instead of American knobs because of the thread pitch. So that's kind of cool. It fit, but I did have to trim it down here. It would not fit on with these 2 screw holes. I'm guessing it's because it fits better on sticky shifter relocators versus a stock T56 shifter. But it was just a matter of me having to shave down a little bit to get it to fit good. But it is kind of annoying that, hey, you know, it's supposed to be a bolt-on product and it's pretty straightforward, but it didn't fit. But, you know, it is what it is. Oh, let me shift some gears. It's kind of nice. I deleted the reverse lockout, but I did install the pin, which has a little spring to it. So you can see this would be 5th and 6th, right? And if I want to go in reverse, I just push it over a little bit more, and I'm in reverse. Alright, so let's talk a little bit about the radiator setup. This radiator setup is a Koyarad LS Swap S13 radiator. So why I chose that radiator? Overall, if you add up the volume of this radiator versus the Cressida Koya specific one, this one actually is, I'm gonna say 20% larger. I don't know, I did the math. What I had to do to get this to fit, well, I had to make these brackets to hold down the tops. You know, this is just rubber hose and some aluminum flat bar that I bent to make brackets. And then underneath, I cut the factory, you know, posts off, and then I relocated them because they were good enough. Just had to move them so that way it would fit the Cressida chassis, and then I had my buddy weld them up. Oh, I had Goon's Garage weld them up for me. Those guys are cool. If you're in North County, San Diego, and you need any fab work, hit them up. So on this side, you can see that the lines make sense because they're both on the same side. Steam ports all 4 corners, and then from here it goes into the upper radiator hose. This is so that way it evacuates all the steam and the air bubbles that kind of get stuck in the heads and comes out. Still got to figure out what I'm going to do for a coolant reservoir, and possibly, well, Justin bought me a swirl pot for Christmas. That was my gift, so I got to figure out what I'm going to do about doing an expansion tank or a swirl pot to help relieve, to help bleed the cooling system. I mean, this filler cap is higher than the rest of the system. I am concerned about the heater hoses that wrap across the top. If I had to add a swirl pot, I'd probably put it to the strut tower or right here in this area. So we'll figure that out once we get there. But I'm pretty sure this setup right here should be good enough for me to start and drive. It's just, if I start to push it and I notice some cooling issues, to figure out where the swirl pot needs to go. For fans, we have some SPAL, I think 1400-ish CFM fans. Got 2 of them. So that should do the duty. That's 2900 CFMs, which I believe an LS truck does about almost 3000 CFM. So I'm in that range. Plus I'm using a thicker aluminum radiator. Hopefully that's enough cooling and that's all I need. Justin works for a sheet metal company. I had him take my drawing and cut me out a piece of sheet metal for that shroud, and then I just kind of drilled my holes and did the rest. And this right here is called trim seal, and you can get it on Amazon. It fits on the side, plus it has a bulb, so that way it creates a nice seal. Hopefully it won't melt, but that's how I did my shroud. Talking about cooling, let's go ahead and just cover the oil cooler setup I got. This is the big boy Koyo. I forget how many rows, but I'm running -10 line to a Greddy oil filter relocation. You can see all these fittings of sorts. It's because I have this ready to go for my AccuSump, my oil accumulator. So when it's time, I can undo this cap and plug that system in, and it's all plumbed and ready to go. I did my best to make it compact and clean as possible, but when you gotta run like a one-way valve and a T-fitting and all this other stuff to get that stuff to work, this is the cleanest setup I could figure out for this to, make it look good. So yeah, we have 2 lines that go under here that run to the bottom of the oil pan, or to the other side of the block. And then from here, this is this has a thermostat in it, so when the oil gets hot enough, it'll open these valves, and then the oil floats through the coolers. For power steering now, it's the same setup in my the Cressida with the 7M, and just relocated it to the other side. Still using the barb to just slide on hose setup. And dash 6 line were getting really expensive, and I figured on the low pressure side it was just whatever. So I just got power steering hose and used a bunch of hose clamps. Then you got your high pressure line down there, which is a fancy Earls with like stainless steel fittings. Let's see, it's like the most expensive hose on this car with the sleeving over it. So yeah, there's that. All plugs in way down there. This is a regular Camaro power steering pump, and I just got the right fittings and all that to connect to the Cressida steering rack. One note about how I did this is I made my own brackets down there. You can see brackets. I guess I can say I'm proud of my work. I mean, did what I could with what I had to make brackets. They all use the right hardware. They use little rubber isolator thingies on all of the mounts, and tried to make it sturdy as possible with using the least amount of metal. And yeah, that's where I'm at with that. What you see down here is the electrical harness for the lights. So how Toyota does it, or in a stock Cressida, you have your harness down here that runs up through the top channel. But when I installed my oil coolers, I didn't leave room for the harness. Plus, we cut the radiator support on across the top to make swaps a lot easier. So when you take this piece out, then you have this dangling harness in the way. So Justin's idea was, hey, unloom it all. And we went ahead and pulled out the wires we didn't need. We tucked it on the lower end of the radiator support and re-lubed it all. And it comes through here. I think down there it's a little bit spicy, so I'm gonna need some of that orange stuff that I use like over here to cover the wire to keep it from melting. But other than that, it's a lot neater, cleaner when you have your you know, your front harness running under on the lower end of the radiator support. This right here is a big mess, and I'll have to get to it. A lot of fusible links, and I'm still trying to figure out how I'm going to be able to power up the factory fuse box without a factory ECU. So I got to add power, so that way, you know, things like the horn, the headlights, and you know, the interior stuff works by powering up the factory fuse box. So I'll figure all this out later. While we're still on power steering, I'll go ahead and talk about this real quick. The hard lines that ran under here were also in the way of my oil cooler lines. You can see where those big fat dash 10 lines are coming out right over there. Let's see if I can get a little bit better light on there, but you can see the two fat oil lines that come out. Normally on an LS, this is where your oil filter would be, but with the canting pan, it gives you options in terms of being able to put a filter here, or if you want to run, you know, relocate your lines, and that's the option I went with. So I got these two 90s coming out of the block that is where the oil comes in and out, and that goes to my oil filter relocation on the passenger side over there. For these balance lines, I converted the hard lines to banjos, and ran my own dash 4 line, so that way these lines wouldn't be in the way of the oil lines, and I can actually get wrenches on everything and be able to work on it independently without actually having to like disassemble all that stuff. So having to like take out your hard lines just to work on your oil lines just sounds like a pain in the ass. So just figure it out now and get it over with. I'm not sure if these lines are gonna leak or not. I know the far one over there I gotta put a 90 on, or at least adjust it because the banjo's not laying flat, because the bracket, the steering rack bracket is hitting the fitting, so I do have a little leak and I gotta figure that out, but yeah, shouldn't be too tough. Okay, in the last video you guys saw me put on the fittings for the fuel lines, so that way they could be dash 6. So here's one of my dash 6 lines right here to the fuel filter that I'm gonna run, and to the E85 sensor, to the fuel rails. And that wraps around and does all that. The return line, using a radium on the rail fuel pressure regulator, which then runs to the return line that goes back into there. I do have to put in the gauge and the plug for the fuel pressure regulator, but for the most part, it's ready to go. And why is my fuel filter here? I personally didn't want it this like here in the engine bay. I could have tucked it on the frame rails back behind the headers, but in a sense, if I'm going to change this and for some reason it leaks, it's a lot nicer to have a leak right here than have a leak way down there where the header's at, right? I'll be able to see it. It's away from the header, so it won't catch on fire. So from a serviceability standpoint, this makes sense to me. I would, again, it would have been nicer to hide everything underneath the car or along the frame rails under the bottom, but you know, from a safety standpoint and a serviceability standpoint, this works out. I don't like how these legs are so freaking long, and they do make a shorter one, but I got this E85 flex fuel sensor from a buddy of mine who ran on a Subaru. It just so happens it's the same connector for this system, so I said, well, if it's free, I'm going to send it. You know, otherwise this fitting would be probably about a ½ inch lower, and it would look aesthetically a lot better than how it is now. But since I got all this stuff figured out and whatever, I didn't feel like moving it or re-drilling new holes for the brackets. I'm good. It's fine. It'll work. Okay, and one last thing I want to cover is the PCV system. So from here there's a fitting that should be the PCV valve, but instead I have an Earls to dash, I think this is dash 10 to barb. So then we have a breather hose that wraps all the way around, and my catch can setup is right here. So what we have is the line that runs all the way around the back of the intake manifold, goes to the catch can, and then you have your PCV valve here. So it should pull oil into the bottom of this catch can, and then fresh air should go back into the intake. This is the fresh air in, which runs into this valve cover. So we have this system where air goes in this way, dirty air comes back out that way, back into the manifold. And then behind the manifold, you have a fitting which then connects to my brake booster over there. And I believe this hose right here is the vacuum line for the fuel pressure regulator. And I gotta figure out what to do with the gas tank evap. So this is the breather for it, and the evap canister used to be here. Thinking whether or not I could take this and put it into the vacuum lines and just feed it back into the intake. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think about that setup. Here we are with the rear-mounted battery. The front two bolts holding the tray down go all the way through to the trunk. Now, in order to have your battery tray all the way back, the back bolts unfortunately have to run through like multiple layers of sheet metal, so you won't be able to run bolts in the back. So instead, in the back, I ran M8 riv nuts. So you have M8's riv nuts, 2 in the back, and then 3 bolts on the front, and this holds the back of the tray. It's pretty damn as the battery moves. It's pretty sturdy. At least the tray's not moving, but I gotta tighten these up because I've been working on this. But yeah, I think the battery should be solid in the back of the trunk, and it shouldn't move once I get everything bolted down. Plus, this is the original battery out of the Cressida, and if we're gonna run a battery back here with no box, then it's probably, it's recommended that we run an AGM battery, so that'll do. But this battery's still good, so I'm just using it to mock it up. Not sure what battery to run yet. I'm leaning towards an Optima because there's just no frills. It has those screw ports on them, and I know it'll fit. But if you guys have a recommendation on one of those LiPo or lithium batteries that are lightweight, that'll crank over an LS and fit in this battery tray in this location, just let me know what I should look for. So we have battery wires for excess power. It is 2-gauge wire running to a circuit breaker. I believe it's, I don't know how many amps I got. I think it's a 150 amp circuit breaker. Let's see. Yeah, 150 amps. Press that button again. On the power wire, and then the ground wire connects to the battery, runs through the bottom of the car. Did use a grommet. Always use grommets for power cables going through sheet metal. And that goes to, there's a bolt on the frame that you used for your gas tank strap. I grinded it down to bare metal, put a star washer, used the same bolt. It's bolted to the actual frame rail, not to some sheet metal, and that's my negative cable. So that's my battery setup. We did swap out the fuel pump. It's already reassembled the gas tanks back in, so just here's a photo real quick of what the fuel pump looks like. I did have to drill out the factory stud, I believe, on the negative, because it's just like a rivet. But once you drill that out, then you can just put a regular, I think, M6 nut and bolt on there and make sure it's tight. But I ended up going with an Aeromotive 340 liter per hour pump that has an offset inlet. I think with that info, you should be able to find a fuel pump that works for your needs to fit in your Cressida. Plus, I think any Mark III Supra pump or whatever the guys use in Toyotas for JZ applications should work. I just went with Aeromotive just because it was on sale and it worked. Otherwise, my go-to fuel pump is an AEM E85 fuel pump. As you can see, I've got no back seat going on, but I'll just show you the power wire goes from here and then goes to there, and then there's actually a hole under the seat. If you take out the seat, pull the carpet a little bit, you'll see that there's a spot for an O2 sensor. So I took the O2 sensor grommet out, and that's where I run my power cable to, and then it runs under the car. So here's said power cable running underneath the car, and it runs along the frame rails. Those bolts are riv nutted, or those P-clamps are riv nutted, and they're secured with M6 hardware. There's like 3 or 4 of them. It's tucked up high so the power wire is above the frame rails and nothing should interfere with the power wire. And then the last like 2 feet up to the front of the starter has that orange fire slaving stuff because it runs right next to the header. And that's how I plan to run my power wire. So with power you need grounds. You can see here's my like alternator ground. I'm using 6 gauge wire for my grounds. There's one right there. There's one running from the frame rail to the front of the head. I have one back here running from the firewall to the block, and then one on the opposite side that runs from the passenger or driver's side. See down over there, from the driver's side head to the firewall. Here you can kind of see the positive battery wire that runs under there and goes right down there to the starter. And what I plan to do is use that same stud and install a distribution post right here. So that way I can power up the factory fuse box, plus I'll run a cable from the inside to here, because I plan on running another fuse box for the fans and the fuel pump. They'll all connect to here. And then from this post, way down there, I'm gonna run a cable underneath or along the oil pan with the fuse going to the alternator. So the alternator should charge to the starter post as a distribution post, and then I'll branch one up off of here to go to here for the fuse box and the new fuse box that's going to go inside the car. Right, so that pretty much covers everything I've done since October in terms of this build, ever since we dropped it in. So I got just about everything plumbed I need. We got some power wires to run and the ECU connect, and we're ready to fire this thing up. Don't have a drive shaft, but I want to get this thing started first before I get a drive shaft and get my exhaust done. So yeah, no big rush on any more parts. I just need time to finish this build. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's like custom work and I want to do it right, or do it the rightest way possible. As the internet says, a lot of this stuff I'm also doing for the first time, like making ground cables. I had to buy the crimper to make my own cables. So there's a lot of things I haven't done before. I understand how they work, but in my own builds I haven't had to do it. So it's more or less a learning process. First LS build, first swap I've done in my own garage from start to, that I plan to do from start to finish. We're almost there. We got a couple more things to do left, and we'll start this thing up, and hopefully it'll drive in about a month or so. So in the next video, we'll probably be starting this. I'll cover a little bit more of the wiring stuff and how I got everything to work, once I figure out how to get everything to work, and we'll start this thing up. So thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate all the comments and questions, and everybody who's still hitting me up and being like, hey, where's the build? It's good motivation to actually make a video when we do make videos. So thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing, and we'll see you guys in the next one.